In 2006, a Danish trekker named Clara Jensen signed her name into a monastery guestbook in Bhutan. That ink mark remains the last confirmed trace of her life. Hours later, weather turned savage across the ridges, winds erasing trails, snow sealing passes, helicopters grounded. Search teams followed her boot prints until they ended on a sheer slope. No descent recorded, no belongings recovered. What was left behind were fragments, a red scarf tangled on a branch, a waterlogged journal, and maps marked with circles no one could explain. The file still reads unresolved. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The monastery bell struck once at mid-afternoon. Its tones slid down the valley and faded into the soft clatter of prayer wheels. At the entrance desk, a lined register waited for names and dates. Pages were blotched with rain from boots dragged across thresholds, smears of ink from pens shared among pilgrims. On the page for April 17, 2006, one name stood apart: Clara Jensen. The letters leaned slightly to the right, pressure heavy on the first strokes. Tapering at the end, beneath it, a clean line of time: 2:45 p.m. A police camera flash would later wash the paper white, but the indentation of her pen cut faint ridges into the paper fibers. Forensic technicians later applied oblique light, mapping each groove. Ink analysis confirmed a common European ballpoint: blue dye, viscosity, consistent with ambient temperature at that hour. Handwriting comparison matched samples mailed later from Denmark by her brother, Jonas. It became the last uncontested trace of Clara's presence alive. Witness statements fixed the scene with detail. Monk Tenzin Dorje, caretaker of the Lingmala guest quarters, remembered her arrival: a woman in her early 30s, Danish accent, trekking pack dark green, jacket pale gray, scarf red. He described her demeanor as respectful, almost hesitant. She bowed before the main altar, placed a small envelope into the donation box, and asked for water. She spoke of continuing up the ridge before nightfall. Tenzin saw no hesitation in her stride as she left. He recalled only the scarf, catching briefly on the door frame before it snapped free in the wind. The monastery was quiet that day. The storm warnings had not yet reached the ridge. Weather station logs from Pobjika recorded clear skies until 4:15 p.m. At 2:45 the horizon was still blue, distant snowcaps crisp against the air. Several other visitors had signed earlier names of Bhutanese traders and a Nepalese porter. After Clara's entry, the guest book fell silent. Pages remained blank until the following week. That silence became a forensic boundary, dividing the record between the known and the unverified. Investigators photographed the register in sequence. Each entry bore fingerprints, faintly smeared by handling. Powder dusting revealed loops and whorls across Clara's line. Prints were partial but consistent with her Danish passport application. No anomalies appeared on the page, yet in the margins. Faint graphite lines were visible. Someone had sketched a circle, then erased it poorly. The graphite did not belong to her entry, but to an earlier hand. Its meaning was never clarified. Monastery grounds yielded other small anchors: a water cup, lip edge marked with saliva trace, later swabbed and sealed. DNA matched Jensen family reference samples, a discarded snack wrapper. Brand imported from India was found under a bench where she had rested. Its purchase could not be traced. These fragments, ordinary at the time, grew into the last tether points of her route. The room itself was spare. Wooden floorboards creaked. Incense drifted. Windows rattled under mountain gusts. Clara stood there for less than 15 minutes. She carried a leather-bound journal. Monks recalled. Edges worn, strap frayed. They remembered because she set it down briefly on the register table while signing. The journal left a faint square of dust outline. That mark was photographed weeks later, after her disappearance was confirmed. It proved she had carried it at departure, narrowing the chain of custody when the journal was later recovered downslope. Her conversation was brief. She asked in English how long it would take to reach the ridge pass if weather held. The monk estimated 3 hours. She nodded, replaced her scarf around her neck, and tightened the straps of her pack. She walked north, boots clicking on stone steps, then softened into snow. The monastery bell tolled again as she left. No one followed. Later, search patrols reconstructed this departure with measured precision. Bootprint molds were taken from the monastery threshold Vibram sole, size 7, consistent with her reported footwear. Pressure analysis suggested a steady gait, no limp, weight distributed evenly. Depth indicated a pack weight between 15 and 18 kilograms, forensic detail extracted from a single step. The significance of that threshold print grew later. It was the last impression that could be tied directly, without dispute, to her identity beyond the monastery wall. Prints blended with those of others who had left earlier, tracks scattered into the open slope, partially obscured by drifting snow. Patrols struggled to separate hers from the rest. What was certain, the monastery door closed behind her, and no one saw her again. Evening photographs of the register show a beam of flashlight across the ink. The letters of her name gleam under the chemical glaze of the page, stark against the void of blank lines below. A record sealed in time. Investigators returned again and again to that signature, as though meaning could be pulled from the way her hand pressed the final N. By the time rescue requests were filed, the guest book had become more than record. It became a shrine. Family members, weeks later, touched the page with gloved hands, not allowed to handle it bare. The paper was already curling under humidity, but the ink held firm. Photocopied reproductions circulated through embassy offices, news desks, search headquarters. Each reproduction carried the same stark fact: Clara Jensen was confirmed here, at this place, at this time, alive. When the file was opened, the first page of the binder bore only a photograph of the monastery register. The guest book became the case's foundation document. Every line of inquiry radiated outward from it. Witness statements, search logs, forensic reports, they all looped back to the single act of her name inscribed at 2:45 p.m. A cold fact surrounded by widening uncertainty. Snow pressed heavy against the guest house shutters that evening. The guest book lay closed on its wooden desk. Outside, winds rose from the valley, carrying clouds toward the ridge where she had gone. Inside the evidence locker, months later, the copied page rested under sealed plastic. Its ink stood crisp against white paper, untouched, unchanging. Her name was the last to stain the register. The ridge path stretched north from Lingmala Monastery, climbing steadily through fir and juniper until the tree line thinned into rock and snow. Patrols would later mark the trail in red pen across laminated topographic sheets. Elevation gain from the monastery to the ridge pass measured nearly 1,000 meters, a climb that normally took 3 hours in clear weather. On April 17, 2006, weather reports confirm clarity until late afternoon. By 4:15 p.m., the barometer at Chuka Station dropped sharply, signaling the storm front that would close the pass before dusk. Search logs reconstruct Clara Jensen's route in forensic fragments. at the monastery threshold. Boot molds were clean, edges sharp, less than half a kilometer up, prints blurred with those of mule trains. A porter, Meera Patel, a 24-year-old Indian student on a cultural trek, later testified that she encountered Clara near a prayer flag mound at 3:15 p.m. Her statement, taken under oath at Fuensholing police post, described Clara as calm, focused, and alone. Meera remembered the scarf, red against pale snow, and the small leather journal strapped to her pack. They exchanged greetings. Clara asked how long it would take to reach the ridge before night. Meera warned of gathering clouds. Clara smiled, adjusted her straps, and continued upward. Forensic reconstruction placed their meeting point with accuracy. A cairn marked with prayer flags stood 30 minutes' walk from Lingmala. Investigators found a boot print pressed beside the cairn's base. Photogrammetry compared it to molds taken at the monastery Vibram Sol. Size 7, wear pattern consistent, depth analysis showed weight distribution even. No signs of fatigue. Snow grains inside the print suggested deposition between 2:50 and 3:10 p.m. The print froze under falling temperature, preserving its contour until discovered 4 days later. Beyond the cairn, tracks diverged. Patrol photographs show parallel impressions leading uphill, narrowing into a ridge corridor. Then, abruptly, the line of prints thinned. At one segment, the right boot print is clear, left one absent. Analysts debated stride error, overstep, or simply wind erosion. No clear answer emerged. What remained certain was the direction north, toward the pass, where the storm thickened by the minute. Weatherlog cross-referencing sharpened the timeline. Satellite imagery from 4 p.m. revealed cloud masses pushing east. Witnesses in Tongso village described a sudden wall of snow sweeping the ridge by 4:30. Patrols calculated Clara had less than 1 hour between monastery departure and storm onset. Her chance of crossing the ridge before whiteout was slim. At 5:10 p.m., radio logs note the ridge visibility dropped to 5 meters. No further witnesses confirmed seeing her. From that point onward, reconstruction relied entirely on prints and objects. Patrol teams followed what remained of her trail during searches days later. Each step was measured, photographed, and catalogued. At 5.2 kilometers from Lingmala, the trail ended. The termination site was documented in detail. Snow crust rose steeply into rock slabs. Boot impressions climbed halfway up, then stopped mid-slope. The final print. Left foot pointed directly at the ridge wall. Beyond it, nothing, no slide marks, no tumble, no descent. The slope fell away into void, yet no evidence of a fall was detected. Photographs captured the last impression under angled light, grain edges already soft from wind drift. Within hours, it disappeared entirely. Climbers assisting the patrol marked the location with bamboo stakes. Coordinates logged 27°24 EN, 90°35 E, elevation 3890 meters. Investigators returned repeatedly, but never located further prints. Avalanche risk made further descent impossible. The cliff below held no body, no pack, no torn fabric, as if the trail had been consumed mid-stride. Meera Patel's statement grew in weight as the last confirmed sighting. She recalled Clara adjusting her scarf, tightening gloves, checking a wristwatch before pressing on. Her testimony was consistent across 3 interviews, but investigators noted the vagueness of her timing. She estimated their meeting between 3 and 3:30 p.m., a margin critical to the timeline if Clara had reached the ridge too late. The storm would have overtaken her. If, earlier, she might have passed through before whiteout. The uncertainty persisted, gnawing at the reconstruction. Other traces near the ridge were inconclusive. A shallow indentation in snow suggested dropped equipment, but no object was found. Dogs brought from Thimphu sniffed faint scent trails uphill, then lost them in wind shear. Patrol notebooks record repeated failures, no continuation beyond ridge slope, trail ends, presumed lost. The phrase presumed lost recurred across reports, never upgraded to confirmed dead. By dusk, the searchers marked their maps in red circles. Each circle represented probability zones, radiating outward from the final print. None yielded discovery. When weather cleared days later, prints were erased entirely. All that remained was the forensic memory photographs, molds, coordinates, and the testimony of one student passing by a cairn. The case file preserves those photographs. The last boot impression shines under flashlight, edges glinting as if frozen glass. Around it, snow is smooth, unbroken. The absence of continuation reads more powerfully than any mark. Investigators later wrote, "Trail ceases without transition, termination unexplained." A single footprint stood alone in white silence. The scarf was found 6 days after the storm, knotted around a juniper branch that bent above the north-facing slope. Patrol leader Sangai Nima noticed the splash of red against white while repositioning a supply crate near the edge of the ridge. It flapped in low wind, tattered at one end, wet from thawing snow. The color was unmistakable. Photographs taken immediately show the scarf coiled loosely, as if caught mid-motion. Its fibers were coarse wool, dyed crimson, handmade consistent with local weaving styles sold in markets near Paro. Clara's brother, Jonas Jensen, later identified it as a gift purchased before her departure. It had appeared in one photo she'd sent via email 3 weeks before arrival. Monks at Lingmala confirmed it was wrapped around her neck the day she signed the guestbook. Forensic analysis catalogued the scarf in precise terms. Textile fibers were sampled and cross-matched with those from her monastery clothing trace. DNA extraction yielded epithelial cells, 2 partial skin samples, and faint saliva near the fringe. One sample matched Clara's reference profile. The other was partial and never identified. Investigators speculated it could belong to a porter or vendor, possibly residual contact from handling. The possibility of interference or staging was raised, but never proved. The scarf became a focal object in the investigation. Unlike boot prints or weather models, it had texture, weight. It could be held, sealed, catalogued, and yet its position made no sense. The juniper branch stood downslope, more than 2 kilometers from the end point of Clara's prints. Patrols never found footprints leading to the branch. Snow around it was undisturbed. The scarf seemed placed, not dropped, but by whom and when remained impossible to determine. The tree grew in isolation, no other branches within 10 meters. Beneath it, the slope fell sharply into ice rock, if Clara had descended from the ridge. The scarf's presence would suggest she paused here, tied it deliberately, then continued. But why leave a protective garment in sub-zero temperatures? Why expose bare neck skin to wind chill? There was no rational explanation. Dogs brought to the site detected trace scent lingering on bark. The scent path led 3 meters east, then vanished entirely. Snow density and wind patterns were blamed for the loss. Infrared scans showed no buried mass, no blood, no heat traces. The scarf was the only anomaly. Photographic documentation became extensive. The red strand appears in over 30 images close-ups, wide angles, under UV light, folded on tarpaulin. Its position relative to the tree was logged by GPS, elevation tags, and compass direction. Patrol logs note the branch bent downward, not broken, as if the fabric's weight had hung long enough to deform it. In the file, a single image remains central: the scarf, in wind, frozen mid-motion, shadow carving across snow like a wound. Caption reads, "Only found April 23rd. No trace beyond." The object reappeared throughout the investigation. It was taken to Thimphu for lab work, then returned, sealed in a vacuum evidence bag, tagged with case number 06BH427. Journalists fixated on it, calling it the juniper signal. Some suggested it was left intentionally as a marker, a message, or plea. Others said it had simply blown free, caught on a tree, meaningless. The truth never hardened. Its symbolism grew. Jonas requested to hold it when he visited Bhutan, but the request was denied. He was allowed to view it through the glass panel at the district evidence room. He described it later as the closest I got to her. When he returned to Denmark, he carried a printed image of the scarf in his wallet. That image now appears in most online articles referencing the case. Speculation widened. What if Clara had turned back? What if she followed a separate trail downslope, unseen by patrols? But if so, why were there no footprints, and why leave the journal further away? Nearly a day's walk beyond the scarf site, the distances didn't align. No known route connected the 2 points without crossing severe terrain if she had fallen. The scarf might have snagged, but again, there were no drag marks, no blood, no debris field. Wind pattern analysis offered only partial clues. At the time, the scarf was found. Prevailing gusts moved northwest to southeast. Simulations showed it was unlikely for a scarf to travel over 1 kilometer unaided and become tied, not tangled, around a branch. The knot was loose, but distinct. Someone had tied it, or it had wrapped and caught in a pattern that mimicked intentionality. Forensic linguistics later dubbed this phenomenon symbolic echo, when evidence seems arranged with meaning, regardless of whether meaning exists. After media coverage of the scarf, amateur investigators flooded online forums with theories. One suggested it was a trail marker meant for someone else. Another argued it was Clara's attempt to retrace her steps, leaving signposts. A third theory claimed she had met someone, another trekker or stranger, who led her away, and the scarf was a trace left in her absence. None were confirmed. The scarf remained in cold storage, refrigerated below 4 degrees C, wrapped in acid-free paper, never returned to family. In later years, requests for reanalysis were denied. Bhutanese authorities labeled the evidence closed for further examination pending new discovery. That phrase, vague and bureaucratic, buried the scarf under red tape. By 2009, it was rarely mentioned except in passing, but for those who worked the case, it never faded. Investigators marked it as the point where the timeline ruptured, a known object in an impossible place, carrying known DNA and no path of arrival. It was the first object that suggested someone else may have been there. The journal was found by a trekking group 3 days after the scarf. A Nepali porter named Kiran Thapa spotted it while collecting firewood on a ledge near the southern fork of the Sering Valley. It lay partially buried beneath frost-dusted leaves, its leather cover slick with condensation. The binding was intact, but the strap had broken. There were faint claw marks on the outer edge, likely from marmots or foxes common to the region. The pages were swollen, ink smudged, but not destroyed. The name Clara J. was faintly visible on the inside cover. Search patrols were immediately redirected. The area where the journal surfaced was almost 9 kilometers from the scarf site, over 2 ridges and a descending path rarely used by locals. No direct trail connected the 2 points. No known search path had covered the intervening area. Forensic specialists documented the find site with string grid markers and UV tracking. The journal was lifted with gloves, wrapped in moisture barrier film, and transported to the lab at Thimphu. Its contents shifted the case tone entirely. Inside, 37 pages bore writing. Forensic ink analysis confirmed the same ballpoint pen as used in the monastery guestbook. The first entries were ordinary trail notes, sketches of mountain formations, weather notations, and dated entries. But beginning April 15th, the tone changed. Clara had written, "Clouds are building earlier than expected. No one else on this stretch. Spoke to woman near stupa, her map different from mine." The next day she wrote, "Lingmala tomorrow. Heard chanting already in the wind. Not sure if real or just echo. Stomach uneasy." The final entry was dated April 17th, the day she vanished. Most of the ink had bled across the paper. Forensic imaging under infrared recovered only fragments. Left the monastery. Ridge looks clear. Path turns. And then nothing. A blot marked the last line. Analysis confirmed the smear pattern matched a droplet rather than a pen stroke. Investigators speculated it may have been water. Others proposed blood. But chemical tests were inconclusive. No confirmed biological trace remained on the journal's inner pages. Marginal sketches occupied several pages looping mountain ridges, flag-covered trees, a rectangular symbol that resembled an altar or door. One sketch mirrored the layout of Lingmala Monastery's courtyard drawn from memory, not reference. These sketches were cross-referenced with local landmarks, but no direct match was confirmed. The leather cover bore 2 impressions that later became crucial: a faint rectangular shape, consistent with an ID card or folded photo. Had once been pressed between pages, it was no longer present. Traces of plasticizer residue were detected, suggesting prolonged contact with a laminated object. It had been removed, but when and by whom was unknown. Jonas Jensen later confirmed the journal as Clara's. Photos showed her holding it during a family gathering in Copenhagen the previous winter. She had used the same notebook style during earlier travels to Peru and Turkey. Her handwriting was consistent throughout. No pages were removed, every tear line was intact. The object had not been altered, only worn by exposure. Its location was another anomaly. No route from the ridge to Sering Valley could be traversed in a single day, especially under storm conditions. The descent was treacherous, requiring switchbacks through ravines. Clara was not believed to have taken that route. No witness placed her near that area. No boot prints were found nearby. Yet the journal was real, and its presence suggested movement after the storm by Clara herself or by another. Weather records from April 17th and 19 showed the valley remained impassable due to snow and rockfall. Forensic soil samples from the journal's outer cover contained microfragments of lichen unique to elevations above 3,600 meters, meaning the object had not originated in the valley where it was found. It had been carried, deposited, possibly placed. This deepened another suspicion already building among the investigators that someone else had handled Clara's possessions after her disappearance. The scarf. The journal both found in places disconnected from the original route, both bearing signs of passive placement, both untouched by weather to a degree inconsistent with 3 full storm days. In response, Bhutanese police reopened interviews with prior witnesses. Porter logs were re-examined. No anomaly appeared except a blank line in the visitor logbook at the monastery 3 days after Clara's disappearance. A pen had skipped the line. Forensic comparison ruled out Clara's pen. No match to any visitor could be confirmed. The blank remained a placeholder in the record. Unexplained. The journal became the second symbolic anchor after the scarf, where the scarf evoked presence. The journal hinted at process, at intent. Investigators debated whether the final unfinished sentence, "path turns," was simply a break in thought, or a record of redirection. Some speculated she had turned back. Others believed she had changed destination entirely. Media outlets latched onto the phrase. "The path turns" became a headline across multiple reports, implying metaphor and mystery. Amateur sleuths theorized the missing words were significant, possibly naming another location, a person, a cause for diversion. None of those theories were grounded in further evidence. To investigators, the journal marked a shift from physical disappearance to narrative void. No more prints, no more direction, only symbols, echo, and displacement. Its weight, dry and warped, was catalogued down to the gram. Its pages scanned and sealed. It now rests beside the scarf in an evidence locker, tagged 06BH427B. One image in the file shows the open journal beneath forensic light. A gloved hand lifts the final page. The ink stain runs like a vein down the paper's margin. No text follows, no explanation. Only the broken sentence remains. The storm was recorded as one of the worst that year. Between April 17th and 19th, winds across Bhutan's western ridgelines reached over 90 kilometers per hour. Visibility dropped below 2 meters. By the morning of the 18th, 3 major passes were officially closed to all foot traffic. That included the path Clara Jensen was last seen heading toward. Helicopter deployment was delayed for 36 hours due to wind shear. The Lingmala search report file 06BH427S began at 7 a.m. on April 20th. It logged 14 personnel, 3 dogs, and a radio team. Searchers followed Clara's known trail from the monastery upward, tracking prints until the slope broke off. That stretch between the final boot print and the juniper tree was canvassed for 72 hours. No gear, no clothing, no body, just snow, crusted and blind. Search dogs lost the scent near the cairn, where Meera Patel had spoken to Clara. From there, the wind made tracking impossible. The dogs circled, sat, and refused to continue. Patrol leader Sangai Nima noted the behavior in his report, calling it resistance without stimulus, an anomaly. His note was buried in the appendix, unexamined until later. On April 21st, the first aerial sweep was launched. GPS logs from the chopper, call sign Drona 4, marked visual targets, snow depressions, fallen branches, dark patches in snow. Each target was followed up on foot. None yielded evidence. From above, the ridge was blank. One patrol member described it as a whiteboard wiped clean. The search grid expanded. Circular search patterns radiated out from the final boot print coordinates. Each circle was divided by altitude and slope angle. The team focused on ravines, overhangs, and avalanche troughs. Debris fields were raked. No disturbance, no drag lines, no blood. Forensic analysis of snow layers showed no subcrust objects. Ground-penetrating radar yielded voids, but none matching the mass or dimensions of a human body or backpack. In Section 5 of the Lingmala report, the term object void appeared 9 times. It referred to places where evidence should exist, but didn't. These were places Clara should have passed through, slipped, or fallen into, but nothing was there. Every coordinate led to absence. Between April 23rd and 25, 3 valleys were searched. in the western spur of the Tongtso Valley. A tent platform was located, square-shaped, stones cleared, soil compacted, but no gear, no food wrappers, no fire pit, no scent. Photographs were taken at 3:12 p.m. Patrol notes described the platform as recent, but unoccupied. Investigators debated whether Clara had reached that far. It would have required descending in storm conditions without leaving a single track. The absence of forensic anchors infuriated Clara's brother, Jonas, who arrived in Bhutan on April 28th. He demanded full access to the search maps. He met with Sangai Nima and followed the patrol route in person. At the scarf site, he asked to be left alone. He remained there for nearly an hour. In his statement, later filed with the Danish consulate, he wrote, "It felt like she had passed nearby, but the silence was complete, like something had sealed her away." By May 2nd, the search was reduced in size. Remaining efforts were limited to drone sweeps and satellite time-lapse scans. No changes. The landscape, reshaped by melting, revealed only old deer tracks and glacial crevices too small for human fall-through. The notion of Clara perishing from exposure began to replace other theories, but even that lacked supporting evidence. Her pack was never found, nor were clothes, or camera, or food, or ID. It was as if she had stepped off the slope and simply never landed. The search collapsed in 3 phases. First, weather withdrawal, then personnel recall, last, bureaucratic closure. On May 9th, the investigation was reclassified from active search and rescue to pending recovery. The phrase was intentionally sterile. No ceremony marked the shift. In Thimphu, the evidence locker was sealed, items inside one red scarf tagged, one leather journal tagged, a Ziploc with hair from a monastery sink-drain negative match, one melted chocolate wrapper with Danish barcode likely hers, and a boot mold, all sealed, all inert. In interviews with embassy staff, Jonas Jensen expressed frustration with Bhutanese protocol. They seem more comfortable with disappearance than explanation. He said, when pressed, the local liaison officer replied, "Some things are not meant to be found, especially here." By mid-May, media coverage waned. Clara's name slipped from headlines. The monastery was advised not to speak further. Local guides refused interview. Meera Patel returned to India and declined further contact. The ridge reopened to hikers by June. Internally, search teams closed the file with a single-line conclusion. Subject Clara Jensen presumed deceased. No remains recovered, no conclusive evidence found. But one investigator, a junior analyst named Karma Dorji, added a note at the bottom of the last report. It wasn't meant to be official. He scribbled it in pencil. We found where she walked. We found where she stopped. We never found where she went. That line remains inside the final manila file, hidden behind clipped pages. The words are faint now, but visible under light. A tent platform with no tent, a trail with no end. The glacial stream ran low that season, too low for spring thaw. On April 26, 2 members of a volunteer high-altitude unit, assigned to the southern flank of the Searing Valley, followed a narrow animal trail beneath a limestone overhang. There, wedged between stones at the stream's bend, they found a snapped trekking pole. It was black carbon fiber, collapsed inward at the midsection, with a single red stripe on its shaft. The grip was foam-wrapped, edges worn. The strap was missing, torn at the base. The pole lay half-submerged in silty water, mud collecting around the break. Initial assessment suggested it had been jammed between rocks, then crushed. either by foot or rockfall. The forensic catalog listed it as Object 06BH427F. It matched photographs taken of Clara Jensen prior to her departure. Family confirmed she had purchased the pole set from an outdoor retailer in Copenhagen, brand identified by logo fragment at the tip Nordrek. Serial number corroded, unreadable. Surface swabs revealed residue consistent with human sweat sodium. Urea. Trace oils, but no DNA could be lifted. The water had erased most biological signatures. Forensic scraping of the inner break edge revealed one particle of blood, microscopic, degraded. DNA results were inconclusive, no match to Clara, no match to anyone else in the global database. It remained a fragment without identity. The pole's presence near the stream introduced new complications. Its location far south of both the journal and the scarf suggested another divergence in Clara's possible movement. Investigators overlaid the find onto existing route models. No official path connected all three sites. To travel from the scarf to the journal to the pole would require irrational doubling back, impossible in storm conditions. The area surrounding the stream was searched. Mud layers peeled back. No boot prints, no clothing, no drag marks. One clump of disturbed moss, 15 centimeters across. Suggested pressure likely from a body or pack, but the soil was too loose for detail. Dogs brought to the area again showed inconsistent behavior. One circled a tree repeatedly, whining, then fell silent. The other refused to enter the stream bed entirely. Karma Dorji's notes recorded the sequence in clipped lines. Pole recovered 3:14 p.m. No match to blood trace, no print proximity. Log absence, no known passers-by on April 17th and 20. Feels staged. That last line raised internal concern. Staged how? By whom? Why would someone carry a snapped pole kilometers away from any trail and leave it? Visible, but just barely. Speculation within the task force diverged into three branches. Clara descended south into the valley, crossing unseen terrain, and dropped the pole mid-flight or post-injury. A second party retrieved her belongings and moved them deliberately or accidentally. The pole washed downstream from a yet undiscovered site. But the stream's flow rate made theory 3 unlikely. Water level was too low to carry an object of that weight and shape. It hadn't rolled, it had been placed. In the report summary, this finding is labeled Anchor Anomaly 3 after the scarf and journal. What tied these anchors together was not their content, but their positioning. Each object appeared alone, each in a different vector, each with no transitional evidence linking it to Clara directly, but all emotionally and visually tied to her disappearance. Satellite heat imaging from the area was pulled from archives. No heat signatures recorded between April 17th, 22, save for low animal body temps. Radar showed no anomalies under soil surface. The pole site was declared cleared, though the pole itself remained in storage. By early May, the Bhutanese Ministry of Home Affairs began signaling quiet closure. Foreign consular representatives were advised to reduce inquiries. Jonas Jensen requested one final search authorization, but was denied. He returned to the pole site alone, photographed the stream, and placed a small cloth ribbon at the tree where the dog had circled. In his journal, submitted later to Danish police, he wrote, "Everything is one object at a time, never her, never a trace of her whole." That sentence became the informal thesis of the case. A pattern was now undeniable. Evidence was appearing not as consequence, but as punctuation. Every object suggested a continuation, but none offered one. The scarf pointed nowhere. The journal ended mid-thought. The pole snapped and silent, hinted only at absence. Search leaders grew weary. Internal email from Task Commander Pima Chering to the ministry read, "This case has stopped behaving like a wilderness disappearance. It behaves like arrangement." Arrangement. A word that appeared only once more in a classified memo circulated weeks later. Later, leaked to a foreign journalist, but never verified. It suggested the possibility of human interference. But no suspect, no motive, no opportunity. It led nowhere. Just like Clara's trail. On May 4th, the Pole was logged into evidence storage in Thimphu, wrapped in polyethylene, tagged beneath the scarf and journal. In the catalog, its entry line is the shortest of all. Carbon pole found South Stream, unlinked. And in the photograph, taken on a cloudy afternoon, the pole lies diagonally across flat rocks, one half jagged open, the other still pointing upstream as if trying to trace something that never came down. A broken pole beside a dry stream, pointing upstream into nothing. The questions began to multiply, only none of them had answers. By mid-May, Bhutanese authorities had concluded the formal search. Patrols were reassigned, equipment pulled, helicopters stood grounded. But Clara Jensen's case file remained open. Her disappearance had moved from active rescue to quiet review. And in that quiet, suspicion began to grow, not from evidence, but from its shape. On May 12th, Sonam Lahamo, a local trekking guide registered with the Tourism Council of Bhutan, was brought in for questioning. A client photo from April 16th, taken by an Austrian hiker, showed Sonam seated at a trail junction with two figures behind her. One of them believed to be Clara. The image was grainy, shot through haze, but the posture and pack matched prior photos. If accurate, it placed Clara on the Southern Trail System a day earlier than the monastery guestbook implied. Sonam denied ever speaking to Clara. Her patrol records for April 15-17 showed she was guiding a Canadian couple toward Jomalari Base. However, log inconsistencies arose. On April 17th, her daily client entry was missing, left blank. Her reason, illness. When asked to explain her location on the morning of Clara's disappearance, she gave coordinates later shown to be inaccurate by GPS metadata on her own group photos. A formal statement was recorded at 4:25 p.m. on May 12th. Transcripts show inconsistencies, shifts in tense, uncertain names, time lapses when shown the photograph again. Sonam refused to confirm or deny. She claimed poor memory. The phrase "not sure" appears 9 times in her 2-page statement. Forensic linguists flagged the transcript. Patterns of distancing language, evasive phrasing, but no admission, no direct contradiction. When cross-referenced with the Canadian couple's account, discrepancies widened. They said Sonam left them unattended for nearly 6 hours on April 17th, citing supplies. They believed she went to check on a sick porter. No such porter was listed. The interrogation ended without cause for detainment, but Sonam's name was quietly logged under a new category in the file, Potential Knowledge Holders. It would never be acted upon. Another lead came from a report filed by Rinzin Dema, a nun from the Ha district, who claimed to have seen a foreign woman arguing with a man near the old hermitage ruins above Chalunang. The woman wore a red scarf. The man's face was obscured by a hood. The interaction was brief, but tense. The woman gestured toward the mountains. The man turned and walked away. Rinzin filed the report on May 3rd, over 2 weeks after the storm. This sighting was deemed unreliable. The area mentioned was over 30 kilometers from Clara's last confirmed location. No trail connected them. The time frame didn't align. Yet the detail about the scarf pulled it into orbit. A third anomaly surfaced from outside Bhutan. In late May, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs received an anonymous email sent through a proxy network. The subject line read, Bhutan, 2006. Guestbook was not the last. The body contained only coordinates, when mapped. They pointed to a derelict forest shelter 7 kilometers west of Lingmala Monastery. The shelter had burned down in 1998 and was not part of any known trail. A team was sent. The site yielded nothing. Ash, collapsed beams, moss, no evidence of occupation in years, no boot prints, no objects. But someone knew the coordinates, and someone wanted that location examined. The IP trail of the message led nowhere. The investigation into the message source was dropped after 4 days. Internally, the task force reached fracture. Some investigators argued the case had shifted from wilderness loss to interference by unknown human agent. Others resisted. There was still no body, no witness confirmation, no suspect, no confession, only patterns, gaps that shaped too perfectly. By June, the internal mood was fractured. Karma Dorji's field notes, later leaked, painted a picture of quiet erosion. He wrote, "Each new item bends the timeline instead of building it, like a false wall. No one ever said murder, no one ever said abduction, but behind closed doors, terms like misdirection, secondary placement, and human vector began to appear. And yet, nothing held. There was no forensic proof that Clara had encountered violence, no blood trail, no defensive wounds, no trace DNA from any other individual that survived lab thresholds. Still, the transcript from Sonam Lamo's interrogation was quietly moved to a different folder. Not in the suspect file, not in the witness archive, just held for review. In August of that year, Jonas Jensen was summoned for a final meeting. He was presented with a summary sheet, no new leads, all search avenues exhausted, no criminal evidence discovered. Case remains open, pending emergence of new data. He signed it, he walked out. He never returned to Bhutan. But in his personal journal, discovered years later, one line stood out. Everyone acted like she dissolved. No one asked who might have seen her go. In the file cabinet, the interrogation transcript remains sealed, its last line. I don't remember her name, but I remember she looked back. The diplomatic silence began in early June. The Danish consulate in New Delhi submitted a formal request for extended investigation. Bhutanese authorities responded with a 2-paragraph statement. All necessary recovery protocols have been executed. The matter remains open pending new discovery. No further foreign-led search efforts will be authorized at this time. It was the final line that mattered. The file, in practice, had gone cold. But among internal channels, something else moved. On June 13th, the Bhutan Ministry of Home Affairs circulated a memo titled Information Risk Containment Case File 06BH427. 3 pages, marked confidential. Detailed communication protocols for all Clara Jensen inquiries. Embassy requests were to be redirected. All press statements required central approval. The word containment was used 5 times, simultaneously. Portions of the case file began to vanish. When Jonas Jensen requested full access before returning to Denmark, he was shown a condensed folder. The scarf, the journal, and the pole were their photographs intact. But the Meera Patel transcript was missing. So was the sketch Clara had drawn of Lingmala's courtyard, and the anonymous email with coordinates absent. He asked. No answer came. Weeks later, Jonas wrote to an international aid worker stationed in Thimphu, a former friend of Clara's, The reply was brief. It's not lost. It's buried. They don't want it to be a pattern. Because by then, it wasn't just Clara. Internal police records, leaked in 2009, listed 4 other foreign nationals reported missing in Bhutan between 1997 and 2006. None received public attention. All were solo travelers. All disappeared near sacred or high-altitude pilgrimage routes, in each case. The official explanation was weather or misadventure, but the patterns echoed fragmented belongings found far from logical trail lines. Absence of remains, search closures within weeks. Clara was just the one whose brother wouldn't let go, at least for a while. The investigative team was quietly disbanded that summer. Karma Dorji was reassigned to border enforcement, his private case notes, stored on an encrypted drive, later surfaced anonymously on a forensic studies forum. One entry reads, "We stopped looking when it stopped being a search and became a question." He refers to what he called the inversion, a moment when facts reversed their function. The scarf didn't mark a direction, it erased one. The journal didn't narrate it, cut short. The trekking pole didn't anchor it, misled. Each forensic item became a symbol of disappearance, not a solution to it. Meanwhile, the guest book at Lingmala was locked, not sealed by police, but by the monks themselves. When questioned, they said it had become a source of disturbance. Too many asked to see Clara's signature. Tourists took photos. One even tore a page from the register. After that, the monks placed it in a wooden box, stored beneath the altar, under folded saffron robes, for those still interested. What remained was digital archived satellite overlays, degraded photographs, scanned pages, but even these began to fade. Hyperlinks expired. Metadata vanished in migrations. Clara Jensen's presence became a series of hollow fields, name confirmed, location disputed, fate unknown. Outside the formal records, rumors multiplied. On traveler forums, tales of strange encounters on the Bhutanese high trails emerged sightings of a foreign woman walking alone. Always just before dusk. A red scarf, they said, sometimes singing, always vanishing behind ridgelines. These posts were almost always deleted within hours, flagged for disinformation. Yet they returned, reshaped, relocated. Among the more grounded speculations was the suggestion that Clara had stumbled upon something, not supernatural, just something meant not to be seen. An unofficial route, a hidden monastery, a hermit community off-map. Some even suggested she had chosen to disappear, but none could explain why she would leave no note, no sign, no message for her family, except perhaps the scarf, or perhaps nothing at all. In late 2006, a closed-door meeting at the Danish ministry reviewed the case. They concluded there was insufficient grounds for diplomatic escalation. One delegate summarized, "The file is incomplete, but not obstructed." Another, more quietly, called it an acceptable ambiguity. The case was never closed, but it was never opened again either. As for the evidence by 2007, the scarf, journal, and pole had been relocated to a secure archival facility in Thimphu, not destroyed, just moved. When a journalist filed a records request in 2012, they received a response with 6 blank pages and a stamped reply not found within current holdings. And behind all of it, sealed folders, missing transcripts, vanished artifacts, was a single official memo, never leaked in full. Only the header was confirmed. Subject Jensen, 427 external narrative closure recommended. A phrase that means nothing and everything. Tongso was the last village Clara was confirmed to pass through, if she passed through at all. A scattering of stone homes, prayer flags torn by wind, and a monastery with a single bell. Tongtso clings to the lower ridges like moss, silent, damp, unmoved by time. The road ends 2 kilometers before the village. From there, only feet and hooves reach it. When the search teams arrived in April, the villagers said little. By May, they had stopped answering questions altogether. Still, investigators returned in June, after the scarf and journal had surfaced, hoping for re-interviews. A new approach was used: oral witness protocol, a forensic ethnographic technique involving unstructured questioning translated through a local cultural mediator. Over 3 days. 20 residents were spoken to. Responses were recorded, translated, and transcribed. Many yielded nothing. A few held fragments. One account stood out. Letho, a 68-year-old herbalist, claimed that on April 17th, shortly after the afternoon prayers, he saw a foreign woman walk past the old chorten south of the village. She wore a red scarf. Her gait was slow, deliberate. She did not speak. He assumed she was with a pilgrimage group, although he saw no others. When asked for time, he answered before the fog reached the hill's knee. Investigators time-stamped this as roughly 3:45 p.m. within the window. Clara would have passed through if she'd left Lingmala at 2:45 p.m. and moved fast. But the problem was the geography. Tongtso lies to the west, not north. No recorded trail from the monastery to the village passes the chorten within an hour's walk. And Letho's recollection introduced yet another vector unaccounted for. Untraceable. He added one more detail. She turned back once, toward the high trees, then kept walking. When asked if he was sure, he nodded. Her hair was caught in her collar, blonde, not gold, like winter wheat. This was not the first time Clara had been maybe seen. In an earlier account from April 21st, a woman in Laya, day's journey north, described a quiet foreigner asking for tea. That account was dismissed as mistaken identity. But now, with the Tongtso sighting, the consistency of the scarf and the silence drew attention. The forensic anchor here became the oral transcript itself. Each line was coded for confidence and linguistic drift. Analysts flagged Letho's statement as 78% confidence, internally consistent, time-cued, sensory-rich, but unverifiable. Other villagers were less willing. One said, "The mountain took her." Another, "If she passed alone." And another, that ridge eats names. Don't give it more. The forensic anthropologist assigned to the field wrote in her notes, "They do not believe she is missing. They believe she is elsewhere." A monk from the village temple, Ngawang, added a new dimension. He said Clara had entered the temple in March, not April. He remembered her because she had asked for a translation of a specific prayer etched into stone, Cham Shing Do Ngagla roughly. The path changes, but not the traveler. He claimed she left a donation, 2 small coins and a folded paper, when shown photographs. He pointed at Clara, then said, quietly, "But that was weeks before you say she was here." The problem was that Clara didn't enter Bhutan until April 3rd, according to her visa. Her passport was stamped in Phuentsholing at 2:17 p.m. that day. Ngawang was mistaken. Or was he? No donation slip was ever found. And the stone with that prayer, it existed, but was broken during a landslide in 2008. No photograph remains. By the time investigators completed their time in Tongtso, they had collected 5 conflicting statements, 3 partial alignments, and 1 certainty Clara Jensen had become myth. Back in Thimphu, when these transcripts were filed, One analyst annotated them in pencil, phase shift subjects' presence no longer time-anchored. Narrative has displaced evidence. That same analyst filed a supplemental report weeks later, arguing the village testimonies offered something no other evidence had continuity, while forensics failed to link the scarf, the pole, and the journal into a single path. The stories did imperfectly, elliptically, but across a broader space than maps allowed. Still, no object tied Clara to Tongso, no bootprint, no DNA, no physical anchor. Her presence there lived only in language. A sound recording from Letho's interview was later archived. At the end, after answering all questions, he says, almost to himself, "Some people go to the mountain, some people are taken by it, some become it." That audio clip is time-stamped and logged but never included in the official file summary. No patrols were ever sent back to Tongso. No further interviews were made. Instead, the transcript folder was marked "Completed Cultural Irregularities," noted, and sealed. Letho's words remained. Blonde, not gold, like winter wheat, turned back once, then gone. In the months that followed, Bhutanese authorities fielded no fewer than 13 calls claiming Clara Jensen's remains had been discovered. Each prompted rapid triage coordinate checks, retrieval protocols, field sampling, and DNA testing. Not one matched. And yet each recovery deepened the case's emotional entanglement because each time it felt like a near return, a false ending. The first came in July 2006. Herders found partial skeletal remains near the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary scattered under rockfall. Torn clothing nearby. The clothing was synthetic, pale gray. Forensic comparison suggested a resemblance to Clara's documented trekking jacket. The remains were packed into a transport box, teeth preserved for DNA. But analysis showed the bones belonged to a male. Approximately 40 years old, of Southeast Asian descent. Not Clara. Then came a find in August boots unearthed during trail maintenance above the Thawadra Plateau. Size 7. European make, one sole worn on the outer edge, investigators thought. Finally. But the boots dated to a 1993 German manufacturing batch discontinued before Clara's travels began. The footbeds had no epithelial residue. The boots had not been worn in years, likely abandoned, possibly stolen, certainly not hers. By September, the pattern had emerged. Each new recovery boots, straps, torn packs, bones, weather-bleached scraps was treated as potential closure. Each became a forensic echo. None resolved the case. Instead, they mapped a geography of longing, a trail of misplaced hope and investigative exhaustion. The emotional cost was borne almost entirely by Jonas Jensen. By then, back in Copenhagen, he had requested to be informed of every possible recovery, each time. He opened a new folder, annotated photos, waited days for results, then closed it again. His apartment wall held a growing map, Bhutan at the center, with red string tying object to location. As months passed, the string darkened. It looked like veins. One object nearly passed triage. In November, a hiker recovered a torn pack strap from a glacial basin near Chalela Pass. The strap was webbed nylon, stitched in the European pattern used on certain Nordreck models. Jonas swore it was from Clara's bag, but the color was off dark brown, not olive green. DNA swabs lifted no trace. The item was photographed, logged, and marked unknown ownership, rejected. It now sits in a secondary archive, boxed and untagged. These repeated false recoveries fed another theory among forensic analysts that Clara's gear had been systematically removed, not lost, not weathered, taken. The clean absence of gear, not a single trace of food packaging, water filter, compass, ID, cash, or device suggested either she had been buried with it intact or someone had removed it. If the former, no burial site was ever found. If the latter, then someone knew exactly what to erase and how. A technical memo, filed in early 2007, considered a disturbing possibility staged placement. It proposed that the scattered artifacts, scarf, journal, pole had not been lost naturally, but deposited intentionally at intervals designed to confuse spatial logic. Not only were the items disconnected in terrain, they were inconsistent in weather exposure. The scarf was damp but unburied. The journal, water-damaged but intact. The pole, crushed but isolated. None matched the environment precisely. None matched the timeline. But no proof followed. The idea remained theory. There was no suspect, no known pattern, no motive, only the absence of Clara, and the sporadic resurfacing of things that hinted at her then withdrew. The last object entered into evidence came in March 2007. A fragment of fabric was pulled from under melting snow on the northern edge of the Paro Valley. It was red, torn, about 8 centimeters wide, but it wasn't wool. Lab analysis showed it to be polyester, dyed differently. The pattern didn't match Clara's scarf. It was logged with quiet reluctance. The evidence tag simply read, "Unrelated." Jonas Jensen never flew back after that. He submitted a formal closure request to the Danish consulate, asking for all further artifact reports to be withheld unless confirmed by DNA or identifiable object match. The emotional attrition was too much. He kept the case files in a black cabinet, locked. He no longer answered media requests. By then, Bhutan's internal memo archive had begun classifying Clara Jensen's case as a Category Null, fully investigated disappearance with unrecoverable outcome. Secondary placement pattern suspected but unresolved. Only 2 other cases carried the same designation. Both were foreign. Both remain unsolved. The cumulative evidence log now contains 93 entries. Only 3 are confirmed linked to Clara the scarf, the journal, and the pole. At the end of the logbook, 1 final page remains blank. It was meant for a recovery record: date, time, location, body, cause of death. The fields are printed in gray ink. None are filled in. And on the bottom corner, a hand-penned note in blue ballpoint, now fading. If this page stays empty, it's not because no one looked. Jonas Jensen returned to Bhutan one last time in 2008, quietly, without press, without embassy coordination. He flew into Paro on a commercial route, registered as a private researcher, and carried with him only a duffel bag and a black case. Inside the case was a plastic-wrapped photograph of Clara at age 12, smiling beside a river. On the back, he had written the words, "Whatever path you took, I followed." He retraced her known steps with precision: monastery to cairn, cairn to ridge, ridge to scarf. Then, farther past what had been deemed safe, into valleys that hadn't seen investigators since the early search. He hired a single porter, Karma Wangdi, mid-30s, stoic, used to foreigners chasing ghosts. Karma didn't ask questions. He simply carried gear and walked. They moved slowly, stopping at each landmark. Jonas carried the case in his hands most of the way. When they reached the scarf site, he asked to be alone again. Karma waited, sitting on a rock 30 meters away. Jonas remained there for over 2 hours. No one knows what he said, but when he rejoined, his hands were empty. The case was gone. In his later deposition to the Danish consulate, Jonas said only, "There was nowhere else for it to be." They descended in silence. That same week, he requested a final visit to the evidence facility in Thimphu. The request was granted, under supervision, inside. He was shown the sealed locker containing the scarf, journal, and pole. Items were still tagged, still sealed, unopened since 2006. Jonas stood behind the glass partition for 11 minutes. Then he nodded and walked away. What he did next was unexpected. He donated Clara's remaining travel insurance fund, approximately 52,000 euros, to a Bhutanese youth trekking foundation. No ceremony, no press. He simply left a note with the funds, "Let others walk farther." Then he boarded a flight to Delhi and vanished from the record. He was never interviewed again. By 2009, the case had entered what Bhutanese authorities called ambient dormancy status, assigned to cold cases where no new action was taken, but core materials remained preserved. The physical file now sat in a flat cabinet under environmental control. It was not listed on the official database. It could only be accessed by internal clearance or foreign diplomatic channel. Unofficially, some called it the empty chair case, because that's what remained, a presence built from absence, a trail lined not with signs, but with gaps. Years later, in 2012, a junior analyst assigned to archive cleanup came across an anomaly, buried in the supplemental folder, a photograph. Unlabeled, untagged. It showed the interior of Lingmala Monastery guest hall, empty, except for one detail. A single wooden chair, placed slightly off-center, facing the register desk. No one sat in it, no shadow, no figure, just the chair. It wasn't part of any known forensic series, not catalogued, not submitted, but the date stamp matched April 17, 2006, 3:03 p.m., 18 minutes after Clara signed the guestbook. The file number scrawled on the back was misprinted one digit off from her evidence code. No one could explain its origin. The chair became a quiet symbol. No one spoke of it publicly, but among archivists and investigators who once worked the case, it represented the thing none could touch, a final presence without witness. When the analyst brought the image to his supervisor, he was told, "It's not relevant." The photo was returned to the folder, sealed again, forgotten. But it stayed, printed, faded, warped with time and when, years later. Bhutan upgraded its forensic archives to digital format. The chair photo was one of only 3 analog objects retained in physical form. Not for evidence. For memory, because sometimes what remains is not an object, not a fact, not even a possibility. Sometimes what remains is a place, a location where someone was, and no longer is, a chair facing nothing, left unmoved. The last official update to Clara Jensen's case file was made on March 14, 2015. A clerk from the Bhutan National Records Office submitted a digital cross-reference request for forensic record 06BH427, requesting updated contact details for the next of kin. The response came 6 days later. Contact not current. Subject Jonas Jensen, deceased. Estate filed closed. There was no further annotation, no memorial note, no footnote. Just a timestamp and a system log entry, update complete. Case inactive, no active notifications. Jonas had passed from a sudden cardiac event, alone, in his Copenhagen flat. No obituary named Clara, No friends contacted the Bhutanese file keepers. When the Danish consulate sent a courtesy notification to Thimphu, it was returned unread. The address file had not been accessed in over 6 years. By that time, the public memory of the case had thinned to whispers. The news stories from 2006 were gone from indexes, travel blogs had faded into disuse, and in Lingmala Monastery, the guest book had been replaced. The old one was placed in storage, pages curled, some torn. Clara's signature, once sharp and inked, had faded under moisture and time, the curve of her J barely visible now. The 3 core forensic anchors, the scarf, the journal, the pole remained in cold storage. A 4th item, the chair photo, had been moved in 2013 to a cultural artifact archive after being mislabeled during a database migration. When a curator tried to reclassify it in 2018, the digital image no longer displayed. It showed only a gray rectangle with a metadata header lost file. No one re-uploaded it. In that final state, Clara's case achieved a kind of stasis not forgotten, but no longer present in a way that could be acted upon. Investigators retired, analysts moved on. The folders, now brittle, were untouched except by annual air checks. Each time, the staff marked the file as intact, no degradation, but no new materials had entered since 2007. A single room in the Thimphu Records Building still contains the archive. Row G Shelf 12 Unit 427. The case label is handwritten, faded black ink. The manila folders contain object photographs, soil reports, map overlays, debrief transcripts, and 3 sealed bags, 1 red scarf, 1 water-damaged journal, 1 broken carbon trekking pole, all tagged, all sealed, untouched for over a decade. Outside that room, the world moved on. Tourism in Bhutan rose. Monasteries rebuilt staircases. Trails were reblazed. New safety measures were introduced. But in those protocols, Clara's name does not appear. Her case had not become a policy shift. It had not changed how disappearances were tracked. It had not even reached the threshold for procedural analysis. It was too clean, too strange, too empty. And the mountains unchanged. Satellite imagery of the ridge still shows the same cairn, the same drop-off where her prints ended. The juniper tree where the scarf was found now leans more sharply, its lower limbs stripped bare. The stream that carried the broken pole still runs too shallow in spring. The trail above Lingmala is steeper now, due to erosion. None of those features bear her name. But in local circles, Clara Jensen became a phrase. Villagers don't say the Danish woman, they say the one who turned. It has no fixed meaning. Some use it for travelers who get sick and retreat early. Others use it for pilgrims who ask the wrong questions. A few say it about girls who disappear. The files never found cause, no trauma, no attack, no motive, not even a confirmed death. Yet across all pages there was a quiet shape, a logic of withdrawal, one where objects outlived their owner, where facts stayed still and footsteps didn't, where maps failed. The final forensic summary, printed in 2009, includes a closing line never published, never cited. It reads, "Subject Clara Jensen remains unrecovered. Timeline incomplete. All evidence terminated without convergence." And beneath it, handwritten, in blue ink, "Sometimes the mountain keeps what it's given." That note remains on file, not as evidence, as truth. For some cases do not end. They only stop.